following content is brought to you by Social Inform Media. This story comes to us from WABE.org. WABE.org brings us a story where, guess what? Atlanta, Georgia, ATL, taxpayers and ATL, it's time to make it rain. That's right, you guys divvy up the money because your city is paying out. Jurors found that Atlanta police officer John Grubbs, I think I did the editorial on this, sounds familiar. He's a grub, all right. Jurors found that Atlanta police officer John Grubbs used unreasonable force against Jerry Blasingame, who was 65 years old and had been asking for drivers for money on July 10th of 2018. He was paralyzed from the neck down and is now 69 years old and needs home care because he's a quadriplegic. A federal jury in Atlanta awarded $100 million to a panhandler who fell and broke his neck after a police officer shocked him with a stun gun, that's called tased, during a foot chase. A foot chase for panhandling. I seen that once in Colton, California, where a guy was panhandling at the freeway off-ramp, and the cop pulled up, and you know what he did? He got on his PA and went, "What you're doing is against city ordinance. Walk. Now, walk." And the guy put a sign in his shirt, and he walked off down the street. Wow! You mean he didn't get tased and foot chased and shot? No, the cop on his PA, you hear it out the window. "You're violating city ordinance. Walk. Go, walk away." And the guy took off walking. Wow! You mean he did it without violence? Because it is a violation of city ordinance. I know we may contend this, we may contend that. At the end of the day, unfortunately, it's against city ordinance there. You want it changed? Click that little box when you vote. And I'm not trying to be a blue line supporter or bootlicker or anything. I'm just saying, if it's against the law, what argument do we have? Vote. But at the same time, if the guy takes off running, let him take off running. He was panhandling. He wasn't robbing anybody. He wasn't holding a gun on people. He was panhandling. Jerry Blasingame now needs round-the-clock care costing $1 million a year and has a $14 million in medical bills so far, attorney Vern Johnson told jurors. Well, he's going to be able to pay that off. Jurors found that Officer John Grubbs used unreasonable force against Blasingame, who was 65 at the time, and had been asking drivers for money. When he was tased, he was paralyzed from the neck down because he fell and hit his head. He's 65. He's an old man. Jurors found that the Atlanta Police Department should pay $60 million, and Grubbs, the police officer, should pay $40 million. Yeah, you're going to get that from the cop. Yeah, he's going to pay $40 million. So basically, this guy's going to pay $60 million. This guy's going to receive $60 million. Because a police officer is going to file bankruptcy and pay maybe $100 a month. But that's where his $100 million is coming from. But even though the police officer has to pay that $40 million, the taxpayers are still kind of footing that bill. The city has filed a motion for a directed verdict. A ruling from a judge on that motion may amend the jury's verdict. So the judge may say, well, this guy can't afford $40 million. So the city has filed a motion and the judge could amend it. It could change all of this. But Judge Steve Jones has not yet ruled on that request. Online court records indicate Steve Jones ruled before deliberations began that jurors could reasonably find that Grubbs used excessive force and they could consider the city's argument. Judge Steve Jones wrote on Friday, "The record would allow the jury to find that Mr. Blasingame had not been committing a serious crime before he was tased. that Officer Grubbs did not fear for his safety. He was a panhandler, 65-year-old. And that the exigent circumstances were not otherwise so severe as to permit Officer Grubbs' use of force. No, he was pissed off because a 65-year-old panhandler ran from him. Okay, it's do as I say or die today. Blasingame's conservator Keith Edwards sued the city of Atlanta and the officer John Grubbs for the cost of his past and future medical bills. Johnson and civil rights attorney Craig Jones said Grubbs violated department policy by using a stun gun on an elderly man who was running away. Grubbs stepped out of the patrol car and told Blasingame to stop, but he moved out of the street to a guardrail and Grubbs ran toward him, according to the lawsuit. Now, Johnson said Grubbs gets out of the car and starts chasing my client, a 65-year-old man, for what? For potentially asking people for money? Johnson said the city did not make a thorough enough investigation into Grubbs' conduct and let him return to full duty 6 months after the incident and before the investigation was concluded. So they're still investigating. They just put him back on duty. Now, the attorney told the jury in his closing argument, this is how an officer gets away with excessive force. You bury it. Yeah, you put him back on duty while you're still investigating. Like he did nothing wrong. Now, Stacey J. Miller, one of the attorneys representing the ATL and Grubbs, said Blasingame's injuries were tragic, but city training and department policy were not to blame. I contend that. The city of Atlanta's lawyers, who also represented Grubbs, were not available to comment on the verdict, and a spokesperson for Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens declined to comment, the newspaper reported. Haven't I talked about this mayor before? Because I remember the name. That's right. If you're in Atlanta and you violate the law, you're going to get a Dickens from Dickens. Officers. Right? I don't know. Try to make a joke out of it. But it's tragic. And the thing is, I know sometimes these panhandlers are fake. I seen a guy one time, he gets out of a nice Ford Bronco, really nice, and he puts on this old dirty flannel shirt and puts on some old dirty work gloves with holes in the fingers. He grabs a sign and he walks at least a block and a half to a corner and starts doing this, we'll work for food, need money. He needed to pay for that Ford Bronco that he had. And this was several years ago. But I know that there are panhandlers that do that there are scammers out there, that are people out there trying to make money just standing on the side of the street. But it all comes back to whether they're scammers, whether it's fake, whether it's real, whether it's a real homeless person, whether it's a real hungry person. You don't chase a 65-year-old man simply for panhandling. You tell him, go away. Who's he hurting? He's hurting nobody. People freely give to those guys. I give them bottles of water. I do. Sometimes when I see a panhandler, if I have time, because there's nobody behind me, the light's green and you got a row of cars, you got to go. But if I'm sitting at a red light or something, there's a panhandler there, I don't ever have money because I only carry my debit card. I don't carry cash. I really don't. I carry a debit card. That's it. But I always keep water in my car. I'll hand him a couple bottles of water. But I don't chase him, and I don't tase him.